Why does France always appear uninvited, claiming to save Africa? Do they still think it's 1850? While the rest of the world is moving forward, France is playing colonial cosplay with 2,000 soldiers prepped for Niger. Let's be real. Nobody buys their stability mission nonsense anymore. If it's about peace, why does Africa get poorer every time they show up? Why does insurgency grow wherever they go? And most importantly, who gave France the right to act like Africa's angry landlord? If this sounds infuriating, it's because it is. But trust me, it gets worse. This isn't just a story about Niger. It's about a global shift reshaping Africa's future, and the West is panicking. But where does the desperate action take West? If anywhere. Let's find out. Imagine living in a country that provides 20% of the uranium powering France's nuclear plants, yet over 80% of its population has no access to electricity. That's Niger, a nation paradoxically rich in resources but steeped in poverty, thanks to decades of one-sided deals that have left its people in darkness, both literally and figuratively. For years, uranium, the lifeblood of France's nuclear energy sector, has flowed out of Niger's mines under contracts brokered by French corporations with the complicity of Nigerian elites. These deals were a textbook example of neo-colonial exploitation. France paid a fraction of what the uranium was worth, while Niger reaped almost no tangible benefits. The money barely trickled into public services, leaving schools underfunded, hospitals under-equipped, and basic infrastructure crumbling. Consider the staggering contrast. Paris, glowing with the energy generated by Nigerian uranium, symbolizes modernity and wealth. Meanwhile, in Niger, rural areas often rely on firewood and kerosene lamps. Children born in a country sitting on a treasure trove of natural resources struggle to study at night because they have no access to electric light. Over 80% of Nigerians live without electricity. The injustice isn't just economic, it's moral. The anger bubbling beneath the surface finally boiled over. The recent coup wasn't an isolated event, but the culmination of years of frustration and exploitation. When Niger's military ousted its Western-aligned government, it wasn't a routine power grab. It was a statement, a rebellion against a system that had robbed the country blind for decades. The junta didn't just stop with words. Their boldest move was cutting uranium exports to France. This decision didn't just inconvenience Paris, it sent shockwaves through the entire Sahel. France, whose energy independence relies heavily on Nigerian uranium, found itself scrambling to address the fallout. This wasn't just about energy security, it was about control. But the junta wasn't done. They turned their attention to the French military presence, which for decades had been framed as counterinsurgency operations. In reality, these bases were a symbol of French dominance, a constant reminder of who held the power. By expelling French troops, the junta effectively closed a chapter on a long history of military interference disguised as aid. This act of defiance struck a chord with the Nigerian people. Thousands poured into the streets, celebrating what they saw as a reclaiming of their nation's dignity. Signs reading "France out" and chants calling for sovereignty echoed through the cities. To the people of Niger, this wasn't just about uranium or troops, it was about self-respect, about showing the world that they would no longer be treated as pawns in someone else's game.
Huge crowds could be seen marching towards a French military base in Niger's capital, Niamey.
Of course, the Western media had its spin. Reports of instability and insurgency dominated headlines. The narrative was predictable, a dangerous coup that threatened democracy and security. But the truth on the ground was starkly different. Far from collapsing into chaos, Niger held its ground, bolstered by solidarity from neighboring countries like Mali and Burkina Faso. These nations, having faced similar exploitation, saw Niger's rebellion as their own. This was no longer just a story about one country. It was about an entire region pushing back against a legacy of exploitation. Niger's actions lit a fuse, and the flames of resistance began spreading across the Sahel. What had started as an isolated act of defiance was quickly becoming a regional movement for self-determination. The stakes were clear. This wasn't just about uranium or military bases. It was about reclaiming the narrative, reclaiming resources, and most importantly, reclaiming dignity. For the people of Niger, the question wasn't if they would succeed. It was how far their stand against exploitation could inspire others. Niger's bold moves didn't just disrupt France. It inspired a wave of solidarity across Africa. For decades, countries like Mali and Burkina Faso have faced the same script. Western nations arrive under the guise of help, establish military bases, and siphon off resources while leaving poverty and instability behind. Now, the script is flipping. When Niger expelled French troops, Burkina Faso and Mali immediately voiced their support. Together, they've formed a tri-nation alliance that's shaking the foundation of Western dominance in the Sahel. This isn't just a political alliance, it's a cultural and economic awakening. Burkina Faso's Ibrahim Traoré has emerged as a key figure in this resistance. In his speeches, he's called out the hypocrisy of Western aid, describing it as a tool of control rather than support. Under his leadership, Burkina Faso has rejected Western military assistance, focusing instead on regional cooperation. Consider the recent moves to coordinate security efforts across the Sahel. By pooling resources and sharing intelligence, these nations are proving that they don't need France, or any Western power, to solve their problems. This kind of self-reliance is what the West fears most. But this isn't just about politics. It's about pride. For centuries, African nations were told they couldn't survive without Western intervention. Now, they're proving otherwise. The question is, how far will France go to regain control? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. France claims it's in the Sahel to fight insurgency, but let's be honest. This isn't about insurgency. It's about territory. For decades, French forces have operated in the region under missions like Operation Serval and Operation Barkhane, supposedly aimed at stabilizing the region. Yet, what do we see today? Rising insurgency, fractured societies, and growing anti-French sentiment. If these missions were so successful, why has the Sahel become more unstable? The truth is, these operations weren't designed to help Africa. They were designed to help France. Take Mali as an example. Operation Serval was celebrated in Western media as a victory against insurgents. But in reality, it left the country more divided, with insurgent groups exploiting the power vacuum left behind. Then came Operation Barkhane, a multi-nation initiative that promised peace but delivered resentment. And let's not forget the economic side of this playbook. France's grip on Niger's uranium isn't just a business deal, it's a lifeline. French households rely on cheap African resources to power their homes, yet the Nigerian people see none of the benefits. This is the essence of neo-colonialism, taking everything and giving nothing. But the game is changing. As nations like Niger and Burkina Faso take control of their resources, France's dominance is slipping. And with it, the entire Western narrative of benevolent intervention is crumbling. But France isn't sitting quietly. After Niger's bold rejection of France, cutting uranium exports, expelling troops, and severing ties, France has moved to its most predictable playbook, military posturing. As of the latest reports, France has prepared 2,000 soldiers for a potential intervention in Niger, framing it as a mission to restore stability and combat insurgency. But beneath the lofty rhetoric lies a far more insidious reality, a desperate attempt to claw back control over a region slipping from its grasp. This military buildup isn't coming out of nowhere. France's energy security depends heavily on Nigerian uranium, and the recent embargo has sent shockwaves through Paris. For decades, France's nuclear plants have relied on cheap and uninterrupted uranium from Niger to power homes, industries, and even its ambitions of being a global nuclear energy leader. Without Niger, France faces potential energy shortages and soaring costs, an unthinkable scenario for a nation that prides itself on its energy independence. But France has long viewed the Sahel as its sphere of influence, a region where its military presence serves both strategic and symbolic purposes. French bases in Niger and neighboring countries have been marketed as counter-insurgency hubs, yet their presence has done little to curb insurgency. Instead, these bases have become symbols of neo-colonial control, deepening anti-French sentiment across the region. Losing Niger means not only losing access to critical resources, but also losing its foothold in the Sahel altogether, a blow that France's leaders seem unwilling to accept. Now, with 2,000 soldiers at the ready, France is signaling that it won't back down quietly. Potential intervention is being framed as a response to the growing influence of insurgent groups in the region, a narrative that's conveniently timed to justify military action. But let's pause for a moment and ask the hard questions. If France's military interventions in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Chad haven't eradicated insurgency, why would Niger be any different? Why does insurgency tend to increase in regions where foreign troops are stationed? And most importantly, who gets to decide that military intervention is the solution? France or the people of Niger? The truth is glaring. This isn't about insurgency, it's about control. France is attempting to disguise its economic and political motives behind a veneer of security concerns. By painting Niger as unstable and insurgent-ridden, it's laying the groundwork to justify a military invasion that's less about peacekeeping and more about maintaining dominance. But France's approach is fraught with risks. The Nigerian junta, backed by massive public support and solidarity from neighboring countries like Mali and Burkina Faso, has made it clear that they won't accept foreign interference. Any military action by France could spark a regional conflict, turning the Sahel into a battleground between African nations fighting for sovereignty and Western powers clinging to their dwindling influence. Moreover, the geopolitical stakes extend beyond Africa. France's actions are being closely watched by global players like Russia and China, who have been increasing their influence in Africa through trade, investment, and military partnerships. A French intervention could open the door for these powers to deepen their relationships with Niger and its allies, further eroding France's standing in the region. The people of Niger have also made their stance clear. Protests against French interference have grown louder and more widespread, with Nigerians taking to the streets to demand sovereignty and self-determination. The banners, the chants, and the unwavering resolve all send a powerful message. France may bring its soldiers, but it won't win the hearts or the land of Niger. And then there's the financial cost of intervention. Deploying 2,000 soldiers isn't cheap, and France is already facing domestic pressures, from energy inflation to public dissatisfaction with its foreign policies. Many French citizens are questioning why their government continues to prioritize military adventures in Africa when pressing issues at home remain unresolved. The growing disconnect between France's foreign ambitions and its domestic challenges is becoming harder to ignore. So, what's France's endgame here? Even if it manages to launch an intervention, it won't be met with the compliance it's used to. The Sahel is no longer the pliant battleground of the colonial era. African nations are pushing back harder than ever, and any misstep by France could backfire spectacularly, solidifying its image as an imperialist power out of touch with modern realities. But should France be stopped? After all, there are only allegations against France that it doesn't help Africa. Well, let's challenge this. While it is often treated as no one has the evidence that France is a clear harm to Africa, today, let's tell you everything with evidence. In 2013, France launched Operation Serval, a military intervention in Mali aimed at halting the advance of Islamist militants who had seized control of northern regions. Western media hailed it as a swift and decisive victory. French troops recaptured key cities, including Timbuktu and Gao, and France claimed to have restored order. But the aftermath told a different story. Far from stabilizing Mali, the intervention left the country more fragmented. Insurgent groups adapted, dispersing into rural areas and launching deadly guerrilla attacks. Instead of eradicating insurgency, Operation Serval merely pushed it underground, where it grew more resilient. Worse, the presence of French troops fueled anti-French sentiment among Malians, who increasingly viewed the intervention as a cover for safeguarding French interests rather than protecting Mali's sovereignty. By the time Operation Serval transitioned into Operation Barkhane in 2014, a broader counterinsurgency initiative spanning 5 Sahel nations, the damage was already done. Mali descended further into chaos, culminating in a series of military coups that destabilized the government France had sought to protect. One of the clearest examples of France's harmful legacy in Africa is the CFA franc, a currency used by 14 African nations and tied to the French treasury. Originally introduced during colonial rule, the CFA franc is pegged to the euro, giving France significant control over the monetary policies of these nations. Proponents argue that the CFA franc provides stability, but critics point out that it stifles economic growth and independence. Countries using the currency must deposit 50% of their foreign exchange reserves with the French treasury, effectively limiting their financial sovereignty. The result? African nations using the CFA franc struggle to compete globally, their economies tethered to outdated systems that prioritize French interests over local needs. Leaders like Burkina Faso's Thomas Sankara criticized the CFA franc as a tool of neo-colonial control, a sentiment echoed by modern-day leaders who are increasingly pushing for currency reform. In Chad, France's military interventions under the guise of counterinsurgency have done more harm than good. France has long supported the Chadian government, led by former President Idriss Déby, despite his regime's history of corruption and human rights abuses. Under France's watch, Chad became a launchpad for regional counterinsurgency operations. Yet these efforts failed to address the root causes of insurgency, such as poverty, unemployment, and political disenfranchisement. Instead, French support for Déby entrenched a regime that prioritized loyalty to Paris over the well-being of its people. When Déby was killed in 2021, France backed his son, Mohamed Idriss Déby, who took power in a controversial military transition. The move sparked protests across Chad, with citizens accusing France of enabling a dynasty that stifles democracy and perpetuates inequality. France's exploitation of Africa hasn't been limited to its military and economic interventions. It extends to the environment as well. In Gabon, French logging companies have been accused of overexploiting the country's rich rainforests, a critical part of the Congo Basin and a vital carbon sink for the planet. While French companies profit from timber exports, local communities are left to deal with deforestation, loss of biodiversity, and disrupted ecosystems. Promises of sustainable practices and community benefits have largely gone unfulfilled, leaving Gabonese citizens to question the real cost of French involvement. These examples underscore a recurring pattern. France enters African nations with promises of stability, development, and partnership, but leaves behind a trail of unfulfilled commitments and deeper crises. From military failures in Mali to economic exploitation in Niger and environmental harm in Gabon, France's interventions have consistently prioritized its interests at the expense of African sovereignty and well-being. For African nations, the lesson is clear. True stability, prosperity, and development cannot come from foreign powers with vested interests. As more countries like Niger reject France's influence, the hope is that Africa can finally break free from the cycle of exploitation and chart its path towards self-determination. So, let's not mince words. France's decision to mobilize 2,000 soldiers isn't about saving Niger. It's about saving itself. The West is watching its grip on Africa slip away, and it's desperate to hold on. But here's the problem. This isn't the Africa of the 20th century. Niger isn't standing alone. With allies like Burkina Faso and Mali, the Sahel is becoming a fortress of resistance. And if France thinks it can march in and restore order, it's in for a rude awakening. The people of Niger have made their stance clear. They don't want French troops or French meddling. They want sovereignty, and they're willing to fight for it, not with weapons, but with unity and determination. France's actions in Niger will have consequences far beyond its borders. If they invade, they won't just face the resistance of one nation. They'll ignite a continent-wide backlash. Here's the truth. France is terrified. They see the writing on the wall. Their colonial playbook isn't working anymore, and their influence in Africa is fading faster than they can react. But Africa isn't just breaking free, it's rising. From Niger to Zimbabwe, nations are demanding dignity, accountability, and control over their resources. They're rewriting the rules of engagement, and the West doesn't know how to keep up. If France proceeds with its invasion, it won't just be fighting Niger. It'll be fighting the spirit of an entire continent that's tired of being told it needs saving. Do you think France should dare to enter Niger? Is it even needed? Let us know in the comment section. What price should France pay for this audacity? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.